Well, welcome everybody to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I am glad that you've joined me for a brief moment in time out of your very busy days, just like my own. And so I am glad that you've taken some time out of your schedule to sit down and listen in. I'm Dr. Mitsch, your host. It's good to have you. If you're wondering, most people aren't because they're here because they've come here before. But the Psych Monologues is a podcast that's trying to look at the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. And so it was the beginning place, I think, for some of the more organized ways of reaching out and trying to engage a conversation with a younger generation. Quite honestly, that's the group of people that I work the most with. I teach at Colorado Christian University in the psych department. I'm the chairman there as well, and so I've been doing that for 15 years. Come up on this coming August, actually. So it has been a journey unto itself in a lot of ways, and the Psych Monologues was born out of the place where we went into lockdown. I was teaching a class just like this spring in grief and loss. I had seniors looking at a black hole when it came to their graduation and everything else. So I thought, well, why not? I've done podcasts before, and I'll go ahead and do it again and make it so that I can have some ongoing contact with them, at least in this format. It's not like it's a dialogue per se, but it's at least something to speak into their lives while they were going through some very difficult time. I think we all remember it that way. Whatever it is we remember of it, because some people I talk to, it's like this is a black hole. It's just all a blur. So anyway, as a result of that, and as a result of some other movements of God, not only in my life but in the life of the students that I worked with, Stained Glass International was born, and it was officially born this past summer in June or July, thereabouts. And it was born with a mission to equip, encourage, and empower the next generation of Christians to live authentically in relationship to Jesus and others and themselves. That's the key word in there is authentically. See, there's a lot of time we spend living something other than authentically. We live cooperatively. We live compromising or accommodating the world around us, and certainly our relationships, for a lot of reasons, and I'm not going to get into that. But this is really a challenge, and an organization meant to challenge the next generation to start up a new movement for authentic, real community, redemptive community, not the kind that they have been running away from, which I think is justified in a lot of cases. So what we're trying to develop here at SGI is what I call outposts for the heart and communities for the soul. And it's a place you can take your mask off, you can be seen as you are, and you can take your armor off because you're safe and you're safe with people. A lot of that, what goes into that, and in building those kind of outposts, is really building people that understand what being a safe person looks like, having the kind of boundaries that they can walk alongside of someone but not do the walk for them. And at times when they're crushed, to come alongside and carry that burden with them. So it's all of those things, and that's a big goal. I'm aware that I think in a lot of cases, if we look across our culture and the interactions, we just got off of a Super Bowl weekend, and some of the commercials pointed to some pretty bleak aspects of our existence. And yet I think there can be some small points of light that were our outposts, places of safety, where I can connect with people in authentic sort of ways. So there is a precursor to it. Many years ago, I had a ministry called the Iona Project, and its inspiration was something that happened, I believe, in the 1300s. And a young priest by the name of Columba left Ireland and had exiled himself and landed in an island off the northwestern coast of Scotland called Iona. And out of there, he and his disciples launched into northern England and began to set up these small, what they called heavenly communities of places where people can come and get educated and get cared for and find safety. And in a spiritual sense, that's what we're seeking to try to develop. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax, and whatever it is that you're doing, I hope that it will be encouraging to you. Now, a couple of announcements before I get to the content, and then I'll move on. One is a, I don't know, I guess it's a exciting announcement. I'm still enough of a newbie when it comes to podcasting and how to measure numbers and people's engagement and everything else. But I do know from having looked at our website where I post all of the podcasts, I do know that we crossed the 9,000 download mark, and as of March 16th or 17th, that's the birthday of the 3-year birthday of the Psych Monologue. So I guess that's good. I hope it's good. I don't know if it is. As long as it's reaching and encouraging people, I guess that's really all that matters. But at the same time, there's some metrics out there that people run by, I suppose. I don't. I just look at it and go, oh, that's interesting, and move on and just keep doing what I'm trying to do. So with that's that part of it. And it's a big praise Jesus moment that people are listening and downloading the podcast. So with that, I won't belabor the point. What I want to talk about today, it could be, I don't know if I'd call it explosive or controversial, but it's something that we all do, right? And that's why I wanted to talk about it in the sense that we create certainty in the world around us that is really pretty uncertain when you think about it. We create certainty by categorizing things, trying to understand it in terms of where it fits, if you will. And that same thing is true with people, whether we admit it or not. It's not good to stereotype. It's not good to label or categorize people. Absolutely. But at the same time, we are always searching for reference points to connect things to, including people. And so what I want to talk about, relatively briefly, I suppose, is just two different kinds of people and oftentimes who we need in our lives, okay? And like I said, these are big, broad brushstrokes, and not everybody is one of these people. But there is the reality that we have a tendency or a propensity to move one way or another, in a lot of cases. And so the question then becomes not so much balance, but which one, if I'm comfortable with the area that I want to talk about, if I'm comfortable with one, am I more likely to be comfortable with the other and vice versa? Or am I only comfortable in whatever the area is? So this is the deal. I'll set it out and then try to unpack it a little bit for you all. And it's what I just refer to as two kinds of people. Now, the background to this is every Friday I have a 2-hour meeting with young guys on CCU's campus about how to do life. And in a lot of ways, we are the outpost for the heart, for men, at least, at CCU. And so we get together and we talk about life as it is, not as we want it to be or it should be or anything like that, as it is, and then and to try to wrap our heads around how do we live faithfully? How do we live with integrity? How do we live with purpose and intentionality and those kinds of things? So we were talking about this yesterday, and I mentioned it in the context of what we were forging and the nature of who we were together. And one of those was what I call mountaintop people versus valley people. And what I want to loop around to, and I will in due time, but I want you to keep in the back of your mind most people's favorite psalm. Now, it may have jumped to your mind the minute I said that, because most of the time people will say the favorite psalm is the 23rd Psalm, right? The Lord is my shepherd, et cetera, all of that. And there's a line in there that I want to focus on for a second in terms of living life authentically as it is, okay? And so hang on to that for just a second, and I'll come back to it. What I want to start with is what I call the mountaintop people. And mountaintop people are the kind of people that really filter life through a lens that says they have to make sure to find whatever is good or whatever is positive there. And so just like living on a mountaintop, we are always in view of all the wonderful things that we're surrounded by. And mountaintop people tend to be those kinds of people. Now, when I begin to describe it, you probably, some names will probably tick through your mind about people that are, I wouldn't say insipidly positive, but they just seem to never have anything wrong. I don't know how else to put it, but they're always looking for reasons to say that they're on a mountaintop and what goes on there. So their tendency is to emphasize all the good things that are going on. Now, listen, I am not saying that that's a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if it's used as a denial of all the other things that are going on in our lives. It is a problem there. And that's the thing with these styles. I don't know, styles or locations or whatever. That's the problem with these, is that do they blind us, and why are we pursuing them that way? And so the mountaintop people emphasize the good things. Oftentimes, even in their conversation with people, they will sometimes start their statement with, if you say, I had a really bad day, I'm discouraged, I just want to close up shop and quit. And they say, well, at least you had a day. At least you had a day to live. I mean, you lived through it. And see, that at least is inviting comparison. And oftentimes it betrays a lifestyle, a way of understanding life by saying, I'll compare it to something worse than what I'm experiencing. That will make this better, and then we're good, right? We're just good, and so they invite us to compare our situation. I know I don't have it that bad. There are other people that go through so much worse. I don't know what I'm complaining about. I should just be happy, or I should be experiencing the joy that Jesus promises me, or the abundant life. I mean, that's probably the one that is the most. So the thing is, and oftentimes I refer to these people as kind of red bow people, because their tendency is to always tie things up into a nice bow. And so when they say something, or they look at life, or they describe difficulty or whatever, there's always a bow to put around it and say, there, that's better, and now I'm good. And so the mountaintop people, as the name implies, are always looking out across the mountaintop, looking out across all that's in front of them, valleys and all, and emphasizing that this is how to live life, is in the mountain and on the mountaintop. Now, I live in Colorado, and I see mountaintops all the time, and I will be the first to tell you, you get to the top of a 14er, which we have, 50-some in Colorado, and the view is absolutely stunning, and actually you will hear people say, gosh, I wish I could stay here all day. I wish I could see things like this so clearly. But when you think about it, looking from a mountaintop is not seeing things clearly. It's seeing a vista. It's seeing the topography that lays out in front of it. But it's not seeing things clearly. And I've had enough experience to know that when we finally get down there, it's not anything like what it looked like on the mountaintop. So they have this propensity on the positive side to try to tie things up and make it nice and neat and certain, and there's how things go. Okay, their tendency, again, and this is not a condemnation. This is a description. There's a difference. But their tendency is to emphasize control over life rather than participation in it, or spectating on life rather than participating in it. Now, the thing is that, yes, they had to climb up there, right? I mean, they had to climb up there, and all the hard work and everything that went into getting there is a test of one's will. And so they tend to they emphasize the control part of it, and then when they look, it's like everything else melts away. They just don't think about it anymore, and things are better, and so on and so forth. But the reality is, we can't live life from a mountaintop. We can't. We go up to a mountaintop, and it's not like we set up a whole community and life and everything up there. We'd like to be able to, but we don't. And so there's a positive side and a negative side on this, or a dark side of what I recall it. And the positive side is they are wonderful encouragers. The only thing is, as long as they don't start their statements with "at least." Now, the reason I'm emphasizing that is that if you're interested, you could see a short video where Brene Brown talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And one of the things she points to about people that are sympathetic is that they start their sentences with "at least." See, they seem more compelled to correct somebody's thinking than to connect with them over where they are. And that's the beauty of empathy, right? People that are empathic, not empathetic. I know everybody says that. It goes with sympathetic, I know. But who are empathic climb into the hole with the person. Now you can say, well, what good is that doing anybody? Because after all, they're still in the hole. Yeah, you're right. They are. But now they're not alone. And as Ecclesiastes makes very clear, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. When one lays down, another one gives warmth. So there's this part of empathy that says, I'm willing to get in there with you and experience even the darkness, which gets to some of the next group of people. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. But they implicitly, the people that are mountaintop people, implicitly demand, and they don't, when I say implicitly, I mean it. It's not like they say this openly at all, but they implicitly demand that everyone live where they live, and if they don't, there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with their faith, or something wrong with them. And I think in a lot of ways, the younger generation, the group of people that I talk to every day, oftentimes have a very negative experience with the church because it seems like they're nothing but mountaintop people. They're people that know things, and they're well known, and they are celebrities, and they got it all going for them, but you don't have any sense of depth there. So that brings me to the second group of people that I call the valley people. And the humorous part of this is back in the 90s, we used to have something called the Valley Girl, who would start every sentence with like. And that's not what I'm talking about, needless to say. But these folks are an interesting group of people compared to the mountaintop people, because these folks have dwelled in the valley of their lives, and through experiences and through some really dark, difficult times, no doubt about it. And if you look closely, they start out in the valley just like everybody else does, and usually that's being angry and saying to God, why are you doing this to me, and all those sorts of things. And then they sometimes they lapse into kind of resignation. It's like, well, God's going to do what he's going to do, so I guess I just got to live here and set up shop and do whatever I need to live out my days here. So they have dwelled in the valley of their lives, and they know what that valley looks like. They know it maybe very well. And there are some people that are valley people that come out of that valley, and there's a vast amount of our topography in our country that is not a valley. It's flatlands, but it's not a valley, and it's not a mountaintop either. And even here on the Front Range, and being as high as we are, we're not in a valley. We're kind of the ascending slope into the Rocky Mountains, but we're still in a flat area. But these people have learned something different about God in terms of their relationship with God and how he works. Not necessarily blesses, but how he works. And their faith oftentimes has been severely tested. And you've got the valley dwellers that are critical and skeptical and angry and cynical and all of those sorts of things. And then there are valley dwellers that are not intimidated by the valley. They've learned it well enough that they've actually seen it strip away their demand for life to be an ever ascending staircase of blessings and fulfillment and goodness and everything else. That's gotten stripped away because they've tried everything down there, from being angry to claiming good things that aren't real good, and doing all the things that a lot of times we find mountaintop people doing. So what happens is that they're no less faithful, they're no less insightful of what God is up to and how he works, but they have a different perspective on it, because sooner or later, as we're willing to live in the valley of our lives, we will be met there, because we've never been abandoned there. It feels like it has, but we've never been abandoned there. I mean, we're surrounded and infused and live in a saturated universe that's saturated by a loving God. Now, we may judge God according to his love by the fact that we're in a valley and not on a mountaintop. Why? Because we're doing a comparison. But the thing about how they are is that instead of constantly making demands or constantly developing expectations about how things should be, it has been replaced with a calmness in their faith that rests on and trusts the heart of their Abba. Now, that doesn't always produce results as we would define them, and that's the key. Because we're so results-driven, outcome-driven, that if I'm going to place my faith in God, or if I'm going to go down this journey and go down this valley, then I've got to know that there's something on the other side, and that something good will come of it. The funny thing about it is, if I actually trust and have faith in him to go through that valley, by the time I get to the end of that valley, or whatever that looks like, what is good may have changed as a result of trusting in the dark. And so the thing I want you to keep in mind is one kind of person is no better than another. They both have the same agenda, oftentimes the same one of trying to control their environment. Either they define everything in terms of the mountaintop or they define everything in terms of the valley. And they're both making an error. Both of them are. The issue isn't the location. The issue is the nature of our relationship with God and our trust in Him. Because you have heard me say this before, I'll say it again. Control and trust cannot coexist. So if I'm going to control my environment and force it into the square hole of mountaintop living, or force it into the square hole of everything's the valley, everything is dark, nothing will ever get any better, I resign myself, God's going to do what He's going to do, etc. So either we force positivity to calm our fears of uncertainty, or we force negativity and never really see anything that's positive. Why? Because it still calms my fears for uncertainty. It still is certain. So they predict doom, for example, the folks that haven't allowed or haven't participated in the valley changing them, but they predict doom so they can manage their expectations downward, because they're constantly making expectations. And let's just be clear, okay? We're not going to live life without expectations. We're just not. That's our way of adapting to novel situations. So we create some certainty that we can relate to and then let the rest kind of fill in. That's what an expectation is. The worst part about expectations isn't that we have them. It hardens into a demand. And so these folks, the valley people, if you will, the ones that are still trying to manage their world by controlling and containing and all of that, their little formula is expect little, get little, and that equals less disappointment. Expect little plus get little, and get little is always going to be based on my perspective of it, and I'll be less disappointed. The funny thing about it is, because I've been there and done that, got the t-shirt and went home, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We can't suppress our expectations. And if I can't suppress them, then either I have to find a way to redeem them, or I have to hang on to them more loosely. So the question then becomes, what kind of people are we? Are we a mountaintop person who tries to always see things in that way, even when it isn't? Or a valley person who always sees things down in the shadows and nothing good. And there's safety in both of those perspectives. The difference is that I think that people that have actually allowed the valley, and in other contexts, and perhaps I'll talk about this in coming podcasts, but is called the wall. It strips away everything that I do in trade, so God will bless me, will accomplish things, etc., whatever it might be. And I begin to lean into just having that relationship and allowing it to bring me to whatever place that is. And see, that's the thing. We condemn things in us in anticipation of other people condemning it. And when we do, it leaks into the water table of our relationships and our emotions. And so the thing I want you to keep in mind, or the question is, what kind of people are we? Do we tend to be the mountaintop people and prefer good times and all of that? Or do we err on the other side and go into the valley and just get a little too comfortable there? Because the reality is that we're going to have people in our lives that carry around in them, and I might add we do too, a timeline. How long is this going to be this way? How long am I going to have to wait? In other words, I'm looking for some kind of money-back guarantee that if I'm going to embark on this journey, I've got to at least know that it's going to count for something and help me, right? So there are strengths that can be brought together in one place. And mountaintop people are looking for God's hands and blessings, for sure. And they understand because they've worked their way up to the top. They understand that our world is inhabited by a loving God. And so they're sensitive to seeing it and rejoicing in that. That's great for a time, as long as they give us the freedom to not be where they are. Now, the other side of the coin, our valley people are not afraid of the dark. They're not afraid of the dark of their own darkness, others' darkness, or the world around them. They're willing to trust in the face of overwhelming darkness and hopelessness. Now, let's be clear. Let me be real clear. That is a messy process. That is not an event in time. It does not translate into that, and it will never translate into that. But quite honestly, I think I need someone who is equally comfortable in the valley as they are on the mountaintop. When they get to the mountaintop, they can have a blast and enjoy it and be stunned by it and humbled by it and all those things. But when the valley comes, they don't run from it because they're not afraid of the dark. And we've got people in our lives, and maybe ourselves, where we'd rather try to live in one of those two places rather than learning how to adapt to both. And Paul actually refers to this, when he talks about, I can be content with little or with much. And he went through his own valley. I mean, in a lot of cases, we call it a wilderness, and that refines us. And we may just reminding ourselves that, well, this is refining you into, a better character. I don't care. It hurts. It's awful down here in the valley. But when I begin to lean into allowing it to change my perspective and allowing it to change how I manage my expectations and allowing it to change the very substance of who I am, otherwise known as transformation, we become more adaptable. Particularly the ones who have leveraged all of this stuff in the valley and on the mountaintop. I can see in ways I never could see in the valley, but in the valley, I can see things I never would have seen in the dark and the shadows. Now, what's the connection where I started? And that is the 23rd Psalm. David says something fascinating. And oftentimes I'll point out the fact that David's journals oftentimes are turned into, a psalm or vice versa. And I think the Psalms are his journal. I just read through one this week that said, is all you're going to do is watch? Are you just going to watch, or are you actually going to do something and help me, speaking to God? And this is a guy that was labeled as a man after God's own heart. So it's not like God gets offended. I mean, there are lots of things that come out of our mouth, maybe privately, occasionally publicly with key people, and we always add to it, and that sounds terrible. That sounds ungrateful. That sounds whatever. We label it somehow. And see, that's unnecessary, because usually we label it because we're anticipating response, not to mention that we've already had the response. That's why we'd label it in the first place. But can I be free, having the childlike faith that God actually said we should have? Can I be free enough to have my emotions as they are without having to change them and add a label to them? And so I'm not doing this description so people strive to be a mountaintop person or strive to be a valley person. God will take you if you walk this journey, God will take you where he deems fit. And our job, my job, when I'm on that journey, is to be honest. Not saying all the right things or trying to put a nice gloss on it of some sort. Nothing of the sort. God doesn't need my dishonesty. He just wants my heart as it is, and not making it so it looks right or it should be, but as it is. He's not stunned by it. I might be stunned by it. I might be condemning it. But if we come with that in hand, and then he'll meet us with that in hand, our heart, and he will meet us there as fully human that are dealing with and wrestling with the hard realities of being human, really, and walk with us through it. Now, like I said, what's the connection with Psalm 23? There's a verse in there that David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It doesn't say the valley of death. He says the valley of the shadow of death. Where do we, oftentimes, when we're kids, what is the most profound fears we have? Around shadows. We see things that aren't there. And we get terrified. So shadow of death. And then he says something that I think is very telltale. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you will be with me. He doesn't say, and you will fix it so that I get out of that valley. He doesn't say, and you'll deliver me to the mountaintop so I can actually see what this is doing in my life. No. He says, you'll be with me. Is that enough? Is God with us enough? If I were honest, in a lot of moments in time, no, it isn't. I'd rather him fix it than just be with me. That's not enough. I don't think that power is what it is to enable me to walk through this. That doesn't count. I want an end. I want a solution. And God knows that. Our Abba knows that. He knows our flaws and our fallibilities and our demands for the world to work the way it was supposed to work, I might add. That's what we compare it to is the way that God designed it, not the way it is. And we've fallen so far away from the way God designed it that we just assume that what is normal is against the design, for a lack of a better way to put it. So I'm not going to sit here and say, so which kind of person are you? We need all kinds of people in our lives as traveling companions who can be safe, who can draw us closer to God, not bludgeoning us with the truth of being closer to God, but walking with us and providing us with some measure of calmness in the middle of the darkness, because the darkness doesn't feel so dark when I have somebody with me, right? And some measure of calmness so that I can slow the RPMs down and I can look at maybe God is with me, and that counts for something. That doesn't negate anything. That's not what we're talking about. See, we think so dichotomously that we say, yeah, but if I believe that, then I can't believe this. No, that's not true. I can hold these things in truth both times. In tension, I might add, which is also something we want to get rid of because uncertainty is tension. So, some things to consider. And again, this is not for self-diagnosis. This is certainly not for other diagnosis. But I think we have to wrestle with the realities of the world that we live in and the people that populate that world. And they will have a propensity, just like we do, to either try to drag things onto the mountaintop and make them better than they are, or drag them into the valley because they know that world and it's safer in the valley. either way, there's errors there. So how do we live so that we're adaptable in both? I can enjoy a mountaintop, and I'm not going to say I enjoy a valley, but I certainly can participate in the journey from one to the other with God and with Jesus, who meets me in both places. And hopefully we can have people who are people that have learned this and can meet us there. So anyway, something to consider. A couple things just to remind you at the end of the program, the end of the episode here. If you have questions or I've touched on something that triggered a thought or something like that, please DM me on Instagram or leave a message, leave a Q&A item on the website at drmitsch.com, MITSCH. And while you're there, you can subscribe and follow what's going on the website. There are new things coming up. I just put up, not too long ago, a Shame and Grace workshop that I did at CCU, and you can watch that. It's a couple hours of stuff just to look at how shame operates and how little we know about grace. And you can subscribe there. You can look around on the website. There's all sorts of resources and things like that, presentations and lectures and things like that I've done. And of course, you can follow us on social media, Instagram at the Psychomonologues, all lowercase. At Facebook, ray.mitsch. Again, it's MITSCH. And then LinkedIn, drmitsch. So follow us and pass it along if there are things that you like and get you thinking and you're challenged by, and you think of somebody else that might be interested in it and want to listen in. Pass it along. That would be great to be able to have our audience. I'd love to get to that 10,000 mark. I'm not sitting here holding my breath until we do, but 10,000 is a milestone for sure. So you can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, any of those places. And last but not least, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we're going into our silent retreat season. We're only a couple months away. It feels long, but I know it isn't. And so if you want to partner with us with SGI, Stained Glass International, to help us be able to put these on and make it affordable for young people that either are in school or just out of school, trying to complete their training or whatever, and they don't have a lot of money, and they are interested in engaging this kind of spiritual discipline that we don't talk about a lot, at least in the church itself. If you're interested in partnering with us, thank you so very much. That we need help continuing to grow the scholarship fund for the retreats, and then also just the silent retreat fund that makes it possible for me to offer scholarships to students that can't afford it. And just to give you a perspective, it's $360 per student to participate in one of these retreats. And so that's not cheap. We've got a few people that are planning on flying out to be part of the retreat of our alumni one, so students that are already graduated. So you can support SGI. We are now tax exempt, and so all of your contributions are tax deductible, and you can do that on the front page of the website at drmitsch.com. At the very bottom, there's a donation button. You hit the donation button, and you can decide general fund or silent retreat fund what you'd like to give. It would be ever so helpful if you want to consider giving on a monthly basis. That would be hugely helpful as far as the other expenses and things like that go into running the podcast and trying to get an organization up and running to meet the needs of the next generation of people. If you would prefer to send a physical check, you can do that as well. Make it out to Stained Glass International. Send it to the address with the same name, P.O. Box 160, East Lake, Colorado, 80614. So Stained Glass International, P.O. Box 160, East Lake, Colorado, 80614. Again, thanks so much for joining me. I'm glad we got to spend a little time together talking about kind of the people we need in our lives and who we are and what role we play with other people in our lives. And I hope it was helpful. And until next time, I'll be here. I don't know if you will be, but until then, love ya. Later. Bye.